My name is Claire Morgan, and the house they tried to steal from me, I built with every ounce of trust I had left. It was a 4-bedroom Victorian on Willow Hill Road. Blue shutters wrap around porch, a swing creaking gently when the wind passed. I used to imagine it filled with laughter photos on the mantel, a golden retriever sleeping in the sun near the stairs. It wasn't just a house. It was a promise to myself that after years of betrayal, loss, and second guessing, I could build something steady, something mine. I never imagined that promise would be broken by someone I once called family. It began with a phone call. Claire Morgan. The voice on the line asked, brisk professional, "This is Anna from Riverdale First Bank. We're just following up on your recent mortgage transfer and new cosigner authorization." There was a silence on my end, the kind where your brain short-circuits struggling to translate language that shouldn't exist. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "What mortgage?" There was a pause. Paper rustling. $812,000 loan finalized last Tuesday. You co-signed with a Jake Morgan. I could barely breathe. Jake. My cousin. Well, technically my second cousin, but he was more like a brother once. When his parents died in that accident years ago, I was 26 and newly promoted, and Jake was 21, broke, grieving, no place to go. I let him crash at my condo, helped him find work. I paid for his first semester of coding boot camp. He used to call me Big Sis. I hadn't heard from him in nearly a year. The last time we spoke, he told me he was figuring things out in Texas. Apparently, what he figured out was how to use my identity to buy a damn house. "Can you send me a copy of those documents?" I asked the woman on the phone. My voice was so calm I almost didn't recognize it. "Of course," she said. "We emailed the full package to your address on file." But they hadn't. Not to my real email. Not to the secure P.O. box I used for sensitive mail. They had sent it to the one Jake used to help me set up years ago. The one I'd forgotten still existed. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my office laptop, glowing in the dark, pulling up every account, every document, every alert and credit report I could find. The rabbit hole kept going. A forged signature here, an old power of attorney copy. They're doctored, outdated, exploited. I couldn't even cry. Not yet. Grief doesn't come immediately when the blade is still in your back. Instead, I made a list. Names, numbers, timelines. I wasn't going to panic. I was going to dismantle him. But what cut deepest wasn't the stolen signature. It was the realization that he knew exactly how to hurt me. Jake knew my weak spots. The P.O. boxes, the signature samples I used for documents. The trust I gave too easily. He didn't just steal from me. He weaponized the years I spent helping him. And that was personal. The next morning, I drove by the property listed on the mortgage. I found it a newly renovated home in a gated community, red bow, still hanging crooked on the front door like it had just been gifted. It was surreal. My name was tied to that home. My debt was tied to that home. But I wasn't allowed near it. Not yet. Because this time, I wouldn't knock. I'd wait. I'd gather. I'd strike. Not out of rage, but with precision. The way Jake would never see coming. But this time, I wasn't just a victim. I was the storm. If you've ever trusted the wrong person or been betrayed by someone who knew your softest parts, follow this story. Because what happened next turned quiet revenge into poetic justice. Subscribe to hear exactly how I changed the locks and took back everything. Trust doesn't break in one moment. It corrodes quietly, slowly, like water leaking behind drywall, until the entire structure buckles under its own rot. I was raised to believe in loyalty, in family, that no matter how hard life got, blood would always hold the line. My cousin Darren and I grew up more like siblings. His mom passed when he was 7, and my parents took him in. We shared everything. Bedrooms, birthdays, secrets whispered past midnight. I was the quieter one. He was charming, quick with a joke, quick to deflect. People liked him instantly. Teachers gave him second chances. Girls leaned closer when he spoke. But behind all that charm, Darren hated being dependent. He hated the way my parents treated me like their own, while he felt like a shadow in the hall. I didn't see it then. I only saw the good. The cousin who stuck up for me in middle school when I got picked on. The one who brought me soup when I was sick. When I got my first full-time job as a data analyst, he was the one who cheered the loudest. "You're gonna be the rich cousin," he laughed. "Don't forget us little people." But over time, things shifted. Darren bounced from job to job, idea to idea. He always had a plan, a new hustle, a business pitch he couldn't quite explain. He started asking for small favors, a signature here, a cosign there. Just temporary, he'd promise. "I'll pay it all back once I land the next big thing." The first time he asked to use my credit score to secure a phone plan, I hesitated. But it was just a phone, I told myself. He swore he'd pay it. I agreed. He didn't, but I paid the bill anyway, because I didn't want his mistake to ruin my score. He apologized, brought flowers, said he was embarrassed. And I, like a fool, forgave him. It happened again with a credit card, then again with a lease. Each time I told myself it was the last, that I'd set firmer boundaries. But guilt is a sneaky emotion. He'd remind me of our childhood, of how my parents never treated him the same, of how much he needed a break. And when someone you've loved like a brother looks you in the eyes and says, "Please, I'm drowning," what do? You throw a rope, even when they're the ones pulling you under. The last time I saw Darren before everything unraveled, he brought over pizza and beer. We laughed. He told me he was getting serious with a girl named Marcy, that they were thinking of buying a place together. He didn't say he was thinking of doing it with my name. A month later, I started getting strange mail. A mortgage approval notice. Insurance offers pre-approval letters for home maintenance services. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Someone had entered my name into a marketing list. But the address was in my city. The lender was real. And the loan amount, $370,000. My stomach dropped. I called the bank pretending to be curious about a loan I supposedly applied for. When they confirmed the last 4 digits of the Social Security number, my social, I went cold. Darren had stolen my identity. He hadn't just signed up for utilities or opened a credit card. He had used my full legal identity, forged documents, maybe even a fake ID to take out a mortgage on a house I'd never seen. And the worst part, the move-in date was that weekend. They were throwing a housewarming party in a home that bore my name. I remember sitting in my apartment, the unsigned denial letter in my hand, the hum of my fridge filling the silence. I had 2 choices. I could call the police, or I could play this exactly like he expected me not to. Because Darren didn't think I had it in me. He thought I'd be too ashamed, too soft, that I'd protect the family name or at worst cry and pay for it in silence. But this time, I wasn't going to clean up his mess. I was going to take back the keys, literally. I didn't scream. I didn't call Darren. I didn't even text him. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started building a timeline. Every email, every letter, every transaction. I pulled my credit report. 4 new inquiries in the past 3 months. 2 from the mortgage lender, 1 from a locksmith company, and another from a furniture rental store. They weren't even planning to buy the furniture outright. They were furnishing a house in my name on installment. That detail made something in my chest burn. For a moment, rage pulsed through me, hot and volcanic. But I didn't let it spill. I did what I always did. I processed. I planned. I made lists. I was raised to believe in handling things quietly. So I got quiet. Dangerous quiet. First, I called the bank, this time as myself. I explained there'd been identity theft, that the mortgage had been fraudulently signed. They asked if I wanted to file a criminal report. I said not yet. Then I contacted a real estate attorney I once worked with on a zoning project. She remembered me. I told her I needed advice off the record about a house purchased fraudulently in my name. Her voice dropped an octave. "You want to press charges?" Eventually, I said, "But first, I want to visit my house." She laughed. "You're not serious." "I'm very serious." I filed a report with the Federal Trade Commission. I notified the credit bureaus. I froze my credit. Then I drove by the property. It was a modest 2-story home in a new development on the city's west side. Modern siding, small yard, black shutters. It looked like every other house on the block, designed for comfort, not character. There was a balloon arch forming over the front door, and a string of cheap fairy lights blinked weakly along the bushes. They were getting ready to move in. As I sat in my car across the street, I saw Darren step out the front door. He looked happy, casual. He wore a t-shirt and gym shorts. He carried a box labeled dishes. He kissed a woman I assumed it was Marcy on the cheek and handed her a key. My key. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I wasn't going to knock. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to let him walk all the way into his illusion, then rip it out from under him. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office and pulled the deed. It listed me my full legal name as the borrower and owner. That was good. That meant one thing. Legally, I still owned it. Fraudulent or not, until the mortgage investigation closed, I was the named party on the contract, which meant in legal terms I was within my rights to do what I did next. I hired a locksmith. I didn't tell him the story. I didn't need to. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The balloon arch was still up. Darren wasn't home. The neighbors glanced over but didn't intervene. Why would they? I looked professional. I was the owner. 30 minutes later, the locks were changed. Deadbolts front and back. Code pad on the garage. Everything. Then I left one thing behind. An envelope. It sat on the marble kitchen island, taped neatly in the center, marked only with one word. Darren. Inside was a photocopy of the deed. A photo of us as kids, arms around each other, muddy sneakers, scraped knees, matching smiles. And one handwritten line beneath it. I trusted you with family. You trusted me not to fight back. We both miscalculated. I left the house in silence. That evening, I turned off my phone. Let them call. Let them scream. I'd spent years cleaning up his messes. It was time he walked into one I made. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls, 5 voicemails, and a text message that just said, "Are you insane?" It was from Darren. Beneath it, another message came in while I was still staring at the screen. "Open the door. We need to talk." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because I wasn't at the house. And more importantly, I wasn't playing his game anymore. According to the security footage I'd installed discreetly under the garage eaves, Darren and Marcy had shown up at 9. Duseda, dragging a trailer of furniture and 2 coffees from some overpriced chain. They parked, walked up to the front door, and then stopped. Marcy reached into her purse for the key. She inserted it. It didn't turn. She tried again. Jiggle. Turn. Nothing. Then Darren tried. Same result. Confused, they both stared at each other. Marcy looked around nervously. Darren stepped back, scanned the windows like he was expecting someone to be watching. Which I was, from 40 miles away. Then he saw the envelope taped from inside the glass. His shoulders stiffened. He pulled it off the door and opened it right there on the welcome mat. I zoomed in on the footage. He read it once, twice. His face turned a color I hadn't seen since we were kids. That deep, blotchy red that always came right before he broke something. He threw the envelope to the ground, crushed it with his heel, then turned and slammed both fists on the front door like a child having a tantrum. Marcy backed up, her face pale. She said something the camera didn't have audio, but whatever it was, Darren spun and snapped at her. She didn't speak again. Eventually they left. Later that day he called again, and this time I answered. "What the hell, Lana?" "Hi, Darren." "Don't hi, Darren me. You changed the locks." "Yes. You can't do that. That's our house." "No," I said, calm and even. "It's my house. I'm on the deed. You used my identity, my credit, my name. So technically, until the investigation closes, everything inside those walls belongs to me." He went quiet. "You committed fraud?" I continued. "Do you want to keep shouting, or do you want to hear what I'm offering?" He scoffed. "You're going to press charges, huh? After everything. You're gonna ruin your own brother's life over a loan. You didn't ask for a loan. You stole a house. It was for both of us." He snapped. "You know Mom would have wanted us to share." Don't I cut him off? "Don't you dare bring her into this. She's not here to see what you've become." There was silence. Then he said quietly, "What are you offering?" And I told him. I offered him a deal. No police, no charges, no public records. But the house, it would be sold. The proceeds would pay off the mortgage in full. Any remaining funds would go toward the debts he'd racked up in my name, and if there was anything left, he'd see a fraction. Nothing more. It wasn't generous, but it was fair, and he knew it. Because the alternative? Jail time, credit fraud, a lawsuit. and he'd never own a home again. He didn't respond immediately, but 2 hours later, I got an email from his lawyer. Miss Hale, my client accepts your proposal. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my attorney and let the process begin. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my tiny apartment balcony, and watched the city lights. For the first time in years, I felt calm, not happy, not triumphant, just still. And that stillness, it felt like power. After the call with Darren's lawyer, I thought things might settle down. I was wrong. That weekend, I sat down with a folder I hadn't dared open fully yet, the one from my attorney stuffed with bank statements, credit pulls, and documents from the mortgage lender. I expected to find a few forged signatures, maybe a creative reinterpretation of my financials. What I didn't expect was a pattern. It wasn't just the house. Darren had opened 4 credit cards in my name. 2 of them had maxed out on furniture purchases weeks before the house closing. Another had multiple cash advances each for just under $10,000, spaced exactly 48 hours apart. The 4th was used to pay for a consulting service that had billed him $8,700. A quick Google search revealed it was a company that helps you secure luxury properties through unconventional funding routes. Translation: they coach you on how to lie. I stared at the paper for a long time, my eyes blurry with disbelief. The total amount he'd used in my name, $148,762,000. And that was just what I could verify. He hadn't just stolen a house. He had built an empire of lies brick by brick using my credit as the foundation. I emailed my lawyer again. We need to freeze everything, and I want full forensic accounting. While waiting for his reply, I called my bank and had every account locked down, every password changed. I flagged my credit with all 3 major bureaus and signed up for fraud monitoring. And then I sat down at my desk, opened a fresh notebook, and titled the first page, Reclamation. If Darren wanted to build a kingdom off my identity, I'd be the one to tear it down legally, methodically, and in full view of every lender, bank, and creditor he'd sweet-talked. That afternoon, I received another envelope at my door. No stamp, no address, just slid under the mat. Inside, a single photo. It was Darren and Marcy, taken from behind at a car dealership. The timestamp, 3 weeks ago. Written on the back, they traded in your old Honda, said it was theirs. There was no name, no note, just the photo. My heart began to pound. Who had sent this? How did they know where I lived? I checked the peephole. No one there. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, turned on every light. Someone was watching, but were they helping me or warning me? The next morning, I went back to the dealership with the photo. "Hi," I said to the young man behind the desk holding the picture up. "Do you recognize these 2? He blinked, then nodded. "Yeah, that's Darren and his wife. They came in a few weeks ago." He looked confused. "Why?" "They traded in my car," I said calmly. He paled. "Wait, your car. Registered to Lana Hale," I said. "Stolen. Reported last night." He quickly went to get a manager. After an awkward 10 minutes and 3 awkward apologies, I walked out with copies of the trade-in documents. Darren had forged my signature again. This time badly. Sloppy rush, like he didn't even care if anyone noticed. That was his mistake, because now I had a trail, not just of deceit, but of arrogance. That evening, I texted him. "You didn't just take my name. You took everything. The car, the cards, the house. And you thought I'd never notice?" No reply. So I sent the photo, and then another message. "I'm not the one who should be afraid now." This time he replied, "You have no idea what you're starting." But I did. I was starting over, and he was starting to unravel. I never thought I'd end up inside a high-rise private law office in Midtown just to prove that I didn't sign away my life. But there I was, seated in front of a forensic handwriting analyst, flipping through page after page of documents with my name on them, except none of them were mine. The woman across from me, sharp eyes behind delicate silver frames, circled each forged signature with a red pen. "This one is traced," she said. "You can see the tremor here. And this," she tapped another, "this isn't even close to your natural stroke weight." I asked the question I had been avoiding. Could it have been done by more than one person? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into a second folder. I compared signatures from all the mortgage title and escrow documents. Look closely. I did. The Lana Hale on the car loan looked rushed. The Lana Hale on the refinance form looked cleaner, more practiced. The first batch I believe was Darren, she said. The second batch. They matched the writing on Marcy's employment documents from the bank. She filled them out herself. I blinked. Wait, are you saying Marcy was part of this? I'm saying, she said carefully, that the woman you say is Darren's girlfriend forged your signature on legal property contracts. That's a felony. And if she works in finance, she knew exactly what she was doing. I left the office shaking. This wasn't just betrayal. It was collusion. Darren didn't just use me. He had help. And the woman I had once watched kiss him through my front window, the woman who smiled like she belonged in my life more than I did, had literally signed my identity away. I called Detective Harlan the moment I hit the street. He listened silently as I recapped what I'd just learned. Then he said, "That's enough for us to escalate. We'll bring them both in for questioning. But Lana, I need to warn you, they might try to flip the story." "Flip it how?" I asked. "You'll see," he said grimly. The next day, my lawyer called me in early. "There's been a motion filed," he said. "Darren is claiming you gave him permission to use your credit. He's got an affidavit. Notarized." My stomach turned. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." He pushed the paper toward me. There it was, another lie in black ink. I, Lana Hale, give full permission for Darren Mercer to act as a financial proxy. I almost laughed. A financial proxy. What is this, a Netflix drama? He wasn't smiling. "It's legally admissible until disproven." "Disproven how?" "We need a statement from the notary. If that stamp is fake, we've got him. If not, we fight it in court." I stared at the paper. My name, my future, all turned into weapons. And for what? So Darren could impress a woman with stolen wealth. So Marcy could wear my life like a luxury brand. I went home and poured a glass of wine, not to relax, but to think. They thought I'd break down. But I was going to burn it down instead legally. I emailed the forensic report to Detective Harlan. Then I filed an identity theft affidavit with the state's Attorney General office. Then I called the notary, a woman named Alyssa Crane, who it turned out lived 5 blocks from Marcy's old apartment. She picked up. "Alyssa, my name is Lana Hale. I'm trying to confirm whether you notarized a document for Darren Mercer." Long pause. "No, I haven't notarized anything for anyone named Mercer." "Who's using my name?" My breath caught. "You didn't notarize this." "No, and if someone used my stamp without permission, I'm filing a fraud report." "That's a felony." I hung up and smiled for the first time in days. Checkmate Darren. That night, I sent one last message to his phone. "The notary says hello." He replied in under 5 seconds. "You don't know what you're doing." But I did, and I wasn't alone anymore. Peace then. The housewarming. Darren's text had been short, but it carried the weight of a threat. "You don't know what you're doing." But he was wrong. I knew exactly what I was doing and exactly what he had done. The next morning, I dressed with purpose. Not for work, not for court, for the house. My house. The one they stole with my name and locked me out of. It was time to reclaim it, not with fists or fury, but with documents and steel. I picked up the certified court order from my lawyer's office, a temporary injunction giving me the right to re-enter the property until the fraud case was resolved. Then I met with the locksmiths I had hired. Quiet professionals, no questions asked. They followed my car in a plain white van. It was a cold afternoon, the kind where even the wind feels angry. As we turned the corner, I saw at the house. Lights glowing, curtains drawn, and balloons on the porch. Balloons. I parked slowly and took a closer look. "Housewarming party tonight." Read the glittery sign taped to the mailbox. Of course. Of course they'd throw a party. Celebrate their conquest. Show off what they thought was theirs. I checked my phone. No response from Detective Harlan yet. But I didn't need a squad car. I had paperwork. The locksmiths got to work. I watched as they picked through the lock with careful precision, every quiet click, feeling like a heartbeat returning to a body. And then the satisfying snick of the deadbolt turning. The door creaked open. I stepped inside. It smelled like lavender candles and brand new furniture. Not mine, of course. Everything was polished and curated. Marcy's style, not Darren's. She had even added photos to the entryway table. There was one of her and Darren on the beach, another of the two of them in front of the fireplace. My fireplace. And then the final insult, a framed image of their welcome home champagne toast. Darren had one arm around her. The other held a key. My key. I walked through the house silent as a ghost. Every room had been scrubbed clean of my presence. No trace of the life I had built. No hint that I had ever lived here, until I reached the upstairs office. There on the desk was my old journal, wide open, its pages dog-eared and highlighted. They had read it, all of it. My private thoughts, my plans, even my drawings for how I once dreamed of turning the spare room into a creative studio. I closed the book slowly, not in anger, in resolve. By 4 p.m. The locks were changed and the locksmiths were gone. I left a polite sign on the door. This property is under investigation for fraud. Entry restricted by court order. Lana Hale. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 6 p.m. The first car pulled up. Laughter spilled out as two couples stepped out holding wine bottles. They froze when they saw me standing on the porch. I smiled. Party's canceled. They looked confused. One of the women opened her mouth to say something, but I stepped aside and pointed to the sign on the door. One of the men read it aloud. Fraud. I gave a small nod. Big one. They left. 5 minutes later, Darren's black SUV came into view. Behind the wheel, Marcy. I could see her jaw clench as she parked. Darren got out first. He didn't look surprised to see me, just annoyed. Lana, he said, voice low. You need to go. I held up the court order. I don't need anything from you. This is my house. Marcy stepped forward, arms folded. You're being petty. I looked at her like she was a stain on fine fabric. And you're trespassing. She scoffed. This is harassment. No, I said, this is justice. Darren tried to unlock the front door. The key didn't work. He tried again. And again. Click. Nothing. Then he turned to me, full fury now. You changed the locks. Yes, I said. With permission from the court. He laughed, bitter and hollow. You think this is over? I walked up to him, calm as a lake before a storm. No, Darren. This is just beginning. He lunged, not to hit me, but to grab the court papers from my hand. But before he could, flashing red and blue lights filled the driveway. Detective Harlan stepped out of the car. Perfect timing. I thought you might need backup, he said, walking toward us. Got your message. Darren froze. Marcy paled. Evening, Harlan said casually. Nice night for trespassing. Marcy tried to speak, but he held up a hand. I'd advise silence, he said. Everything's on record now. As they were escorted to their car for formal questioning, I stood on my porch, no longer a ghost, no longer afraid. This was my home again, and I was done being erased. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty but full of presence, full of truth. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. Detective Harlan had taken Darren and Marcy in for questioning. It wasn't an arrest, not yet, but it was enough to rattle them, enough to put everything in motion. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the bay window where I used to write. It still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, probably from Marcy's obsessive staging. I reached for my laptop and opened the folder titled Restoration. That was the name I'd given this mission, not just to reclaim the house, but to restore the truth. And now that I had the house back, at least temporarily, I needed to get ahead of the next twist. Because if I knew Darren, he wasn't done. I started combing through the scanned documents from the mortgage transfer. Everything they had filed was public because they used my name. The lender, Sunvista Credit Union, had processed the loan quickly. Too quickly. The signatures on the loan papers were mine, or rather, forgeries of mine. But it was the notary stamp that caught my eye. It belonged to a woman named Diane Behrens. And the weird part, she'd notarized the document in person, in a town I hadn't visited in 6 years. I clicked open another file, the same notary stamp, another document, same location, and then something even stranger. The contact phone number listed for me on one of the forms, it wasn't mine, but I'd seen it before. It was the number Darren used when we were married. The one connected to a burner account we used for Craigslist furniture pickups. A number he kept around for private stuff. I sat back in my chair. This wasn't just Marcy's idea. This was planned. Old burner phone, forged signatures, a notary who'd verified me from miles away. This was fraud, and I could prove it. I called Detective Harlan. I think I found something, I said. The notary stamp, it doesn't match up. The woman listed notarized my signature from a location I wasn't even near. Want me to send the files? There was a long pause. Then his voice low and careful. Lana, Diane Behrens was suspended last year for falsifying real estate records. We've had our eye on her. If she's involved, this isn't just a family matter anymore. That was it. That was the break. The next few hours were a blur. Emails flying, screenshots exported, a conference call with my lawyer, then a visit from Detective Harlan himself, who picked up the physical files and took notes on every forged detail. You're building a hell of a case, he said as he flipped through the evidence. Paperwork this solid? They're not walking away from this. He paused, looking around the house. Mind if I ask something? Sure, I said. Why didn't you just walk away? Sell the house. Start over. I looked at the walls, the wooden beams, the old family photos I hadn't yet brought back down from the attic. Because I said slowly this was mine before it was ever theirs. And because sometimes walking away means teaching them. It's okay to steal from people who stay silent. He nodded. Fair enough. Later that night I climbed into bed, my mind racing but calm. The fight was far from over. But this time I had the momentum, the evidence, the power. And I wasn't going to stop until every last piece of this twisted plot was exposed. 3 days after Detective Harlan picked up the documents, I got a voicemail. Lana, it's Harlan. We traced the notary connection. There's something you need to see. Call me. I did. Within an hour, I was in his office. My fingers laced tightly, heart pounding with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. He slid a folder across the desk. A printed screenshot was clipped to the front security footage. A small, blurry office lobby with a signing desk and a wall calendar showing April-y. And sitting at that desk was someone I hadn't seen in 5 years. My cousin, Jenna. I stared at the photo, my pulse slowing in disbelief. You're sure this is the notary visit? I asked. Harlan nodded. We matched the timestamp with the documents and called the building. They confirmed Diane Behrens used that lobby. She notarized the forged loan papers that day, and Jenna signed as you. I didn't speak. Because I couldn't. Because my voice had been stolen not just by Darren or Marcy, but by someone who once braided my hair when I was 7, who once cried at my wedding, who once shared my Netflix password like it meant something. Did they pay her? I asked finally. Harlan opened the folder again. Inside was a transcript of Jenna's initial statement. One line was circled. They said it was just for convenience. They said Lana wouldn't mind. I left the station feeling numb, not angry, not even sad, just exhausted. Because betrayal when it comes from someone far away hurts like a slap, but betrayal from someone who shares your blood, it seeps into your bones. I drove back to the house. The porch light flickered as I stepped inside, a gentle reminder that everything can be rewired, replaced. I set my keys down and opened the box I hadn't dared to touch since this mess began. Inside were old photos. Jenna and me at summer camp, arms wrapped tight. Her wearing my scarf at college orientation. Us on the beach in '09 eating bad tacos and laughing like idiots. It all looked so real. And maybe it was. Back then. The next morning, I met with my attorney. We're adding Jenna to the suit, he said, not even flinching. She impersonated you knowingly. That's felony identity fraud. Will she go to jail? He sighed. Maybe. Depends on the DA. I sat quietly staring at the contract in my hands. I don't want revenge, I said, but I want her to feel what it's like to be erased. He nodded. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just turning the lock behind you. That night, I drafted a letter, not to Jenna, but to my younger self. It began like this. Dear Lana, one day the people you trusted most will sign away your name, but you'll find your voice in the silence that follows. The final twist came 2 weeks later. Harlan called again. "Guess who just tried to use your social again?" he said. "Don't tell me." "Oh, I will," he said with a dry chuckle. "Marcy. She tried to open a credit line using your maiden name. She didn't realize we flagged every alert." He paused. "And Darren. Cooperating. Which means he's throwing everyone else under the bus." I almost laughed. Almost. But instead I whispered, "Good." Then I picked up my camera. It had been too long. Too many days spent documenting fraud and fire. Now it was time to document truth again. The front of my lens captured the morning light filtering through the window, the soft edges of my reclaimed home, the keys on the table mine again. But then I turned the lens inward. Click the shutter. And for once, I wasn't capturing a facade. I was capturing a woman who had been taken for granted, written off, erased, and who was now fully and irrevocably in focus. P10. The courtroom and the key. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, though the air conditioning certainly did its job, but in tone. The beige walls, the flickering fluorescent lights, the silence between case numbers being called. It was sterile, almost indifferent. And yet, in that space, my life and everything that had been stolen from it was about to be put on display. I wore black slacks and a navy blouse. No jewelry. No makeup beyond the essentials. I wanted to look composed, but not performative. After months of watching other people pretend to be me, forge my name, sign my rights away, I refused to play anyone but myself. The defendants entered together. Darren, Marcy, and Jenna. I didn't look at them at first. I wanted their presence to land like background noise, like elevator music you know is there, but choose not to hear. Marcy's hair was dyed again, a rich red this time. Darren looked smaller than I remembered, his once cocky posture now slumped and uncertain. And Jenna looked like someone trying to disappear into a cardigan. My attorney leaned over. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," I said. The bailiff called the case number. "All rise." The judge was a tall woman with silver hair and sharp glasses. She scanned the courtroom with practiced efficiency. "This is case number 47B, she began. People versus Darren Cole, Marcy Jensen, and Jenna Taylor. Allegations include identity fraud, mortgage fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and attempted credit misrepresentation." My name wasn't even said yet, but I felt it sitting in the middle of the room, invisible, but undeniable. My attorney opened the prosecution. He was sharp, focused, and deliberate. He introduced the paper trail. Forged signatures, bank correspondence, fake authorizations. Then came the timeline, how the defendants secured a $480,000 mortgage by impersonating me and using my social security number. How they moved in without notice. How Jenna posed as me before a notary public. And then he did something I wasn't expecting. He clicked a remote. A projection screen lit up. On it, a photo, grainy, a timestamp on the bottom. Jenna sitting across a notary pen in hand. It was the image Harlan had shown me. But here in court it hit different. There was something humiliating about it and also deeply clarifying. This wasn't a family matter anymore. It was federal, and they were not going to brush this one under the rug. The defense tried to argue misunderstanding, that I had verbally given permission, that Jenna had always helped me with documents, that Darren was confused about which bank account was which. But the prosecutor was relentless. No emails, no text messages, no recorded authorizations, nothing. Just their word, which by now was as flimsy as the foundation they tried to build that house on. And then it was my turn. The witness stand felt surreal, elevated, exposed. But I remembered my therapist's advice. Breathe. State facts. Look at the judge, not at them. So I did. I never gave permission for anyone to use my name, I said. I never authorized the mortgage. I was not informed of the property purchase. My signature was forged. My identity was stolen. My trust in people I once considered family was abused beyond measure. Did you retaliate in any way? The prosecutor asked. I changed the locks, I said. That's it? There was a moment of silence in the room, and then the judge leaned forward. Miss Whitmore, did you ever receive an apology? I looked across the aisle directly at Jenna. Her eyes dropped to her lap. No, I said. Not once. When I stepped down from the stand, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the first breath toward it. The judge called a short recess. I stepped outside and leaned against the wall, the coolness of the marble grounding me. Jenna walked past me. For a second, it looked like she might say something. She didn't. She walked by. Because maybe even she knew some things can't be undone with a few sorries. Back inside, the final statements began. The prosecution reminded the court that what had happened wasn't just betrayal, it was criminal. These defendants treated a person like paperwork. They stole her future for their convenience. And when caught, they offered no remorse, only excuses. Then the judge asked a final question to the room. Does anyone wish to make a personal statement before sentencing? I stood, again, because I had one more thing to say. When someone steals your identity, I began. They don't just take numbers or names. They take your peace. They rewrite your narrative without permission. For months, I lived in a fog of disbelief, of wondering how people I once loved could justify doing this. But I'm here today not to beg for justice, but to bear witness. Because no one should have to suffer in silence just to protect someone else's comfort. I looked directly at Darren. At first, I thought changing the locks was revenge. But it wasn't. It was a beginning. I turned to the judge. And today, I'm locking that chapter for good. She nodded. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. The gavel came down, and everything that had unraveled started to mend. P-left, headlines and side doors. The day after the verdict, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating across the nightstand, a relentless stream of texts, missed calls, and push notifications. I sat up slowly, body sore from tension I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. The digital world had caught up. Cousins convicted in identity fraud scheme. Woman reclaims home after family impersonates her. Justice served. Lana Whitmore fights back against mortgage fraud. My name was in headlines now. Not buried in fine print on a forged contract, not whispered behind closed family doors, but right there, bold and centered for the world to see. At first it was surreal. Then the emails started. Some from distant friends I hadn't heard from in years. Some from strangers, lawyers, journalists, women who had similar stories. A few were angry. Most were empowering. One simply said, "You just reminded me that I'm not crazy. Thank you." I hadn't planned on becoming a symbol. I hadn't planned on becoming anything at all. I just wanted my life back. But somehow, by standing up for myself, not with drama, but with truth, I had stepped into something bigger. I went to the coffee shop that morning wearing oversized sunglasses and a hoodie as if I were famous. Which I wasn't. Not really. But the barista smiled when she handed me my drink. "You're the girl from the article, right?" I froze. Maybe. She winked. "Well, if I ever need someone to change my locks with style, I know who to call." We both laughed. It was light, unexpected, safe. And for the first time in a while, I realized I wasn't hiding anymore. Not really. I was just visible. Meanwhile, Darren, Marcy, and Jenna had their own headlines. And not the flattering kind. Court sketches of them went viral for a day or two, especially one of Darren looking particularly confused, mid-sentence. The internet, of course, had a field day, but I didn't comment. I didn't post. I didn't need to. Their silence in court had said more than enough. By the end of that week, the locks I'd changed had become more than metaphorical. I began redecorating the house. Not out of spite, but out of reclamation. Gone were the staged furniture pieces they'd used during their short, fraudulent stay. I replaced their cold gray curtains with warm mustard drapes. I took down the wall-mounted flat screen they installed and put up a giant abstract canvas I'd painted in college. I left the key they used in a glass shadow box labeled, "Not yours." And then something strange happened. My father called. We hadn't spoken in nearly 4 years, not since he told me working in branding wasn't a real career path, and that I should learn from my cousin Darren. I stared at his name on the screen. A part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but I picked up, "Lana," he said, awkward and slow, like the name had grown unfamiliar in his mouth. "I, saw the news?" "Of course you did. I just wanted to say, well, I didn't know they'd done all that." I waited. "I guess I owe you an apology." I stayed silent, and he added, "You didn't deserve that." Still, I said nothing. Because the truth is, I didn't want words from him. I wanted acknowledgement, years ago. And now his call felt less like closure and more like someone trying to hitch a ride on a story that didn't belong to them. "I appreciate the call," I said flatly. "But I'm not looking for retroactive loyalty." Click. Later that day, I visited Harlan. He had moved to a new firm bigger now with his own assistant and office that had real sunlight. When I walked in, he smiled like we were old friends, which I suppose we had become in some strange professional way. "Thought you'd gone Hollywood," he joked. "I brought muffins." He held up a hand. "In that case, I'll allow it." We sat across from each other, steam rising from paper cups. "I just wanted to thank you," I said. He shrugged. "You did the hard part." "No," I said. "You saw me when no one else did." He grew quiet. "We deal with a lot of cases like this, Lana, but most people give up halfway through. You didn't." "I couldn't." He nodded. "I know." Then he reached into his drawer and slid across a thin envelope. "What's this?" "Deed copy. Official." Everything cleared. "You're not just the legal owner now. You're the sole name on record." I stared at it. A single sheet of paper, but it felt like 10 years of validation compacted into one crisp document. That night, I cooked dinner for myself, real food, not delivery. I set one plate, poured one glass of wine, lit a candle, and I sat by the window of the house they tried to steal with locks I'd changed, and a door that only I held the key to. And I said it out loud just once, just to myself. "I am not someone you get to write over." It had been 3 weeks since the trial. The house was mine again, fully, undeniably, and legally mine. But something still felt unfinished. Not the paperwork. That was solid. Not the locks. I had those changed the night Darren and Marcy tried to slither their way in. No, what haunted me wasn't a loophole. It was silence. The kind of silence that follows years of betrayal. The silence left behind by people you once called family. The kind that echoes through every room of your life long after the voices are gone. Then one morning, a letter came. Not an email, not a notification. A real letter, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a single piece of thick stationery paper. No salutation. Just handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I never agreed with what they did. I said nothing, and that was my mistake. But I saw everything. And I kept every file. You'll know what to do. Taped to the bottom of the note. A flash drive. No name. But I knew who sent it. Jenna. My cousin Jenna had been the third wheel in the fraud. Quiet. Cold. Efficient. The kind of person who always typed, never talked. She was the one who filed the fake address change with the DMV. The one who forwarded the credit checks. But during the trial, she barely spoke. Just stared at her hands. Took the plea deal. Never looked at me once. And now this. I stared at the flash drive for hours. I didn't plug it in. I just kept it on the table next to my tea, like it might explode. What could she possibly have saved? Why now? Guilt. Survival. A final act of decency. I wasn't sure what scared me more, that Jenna had been documenting everything, or that this too might be a trap. Still, I called Harlan. "I have something," I said. He didn't ask questions. Just told me to meet him at his office. The next morning, we plugged in the drive together. Harlan handled the keyboard. I sat behind him watching the screen. It was all there. Spreadsheets of forged expense claims. Email threads between Darren and a loan officer who clearly ignored red flags. Screenshots of Jenna warning them that I might notice the mortgage alerts. A scanned copy of Darren practicing my signature on napkins. But the most damning, a hidden video file. It was grainy, likely from a home security cam. The three of them sitting around a kitchen island, wine glasses in hand. Darren holding my credit report like a trophy. "She doesn't even check her mail," he was saying, laughing. Marcy smirked. "She's too busy saving dogs and doing yoga." Jenna didn't laugh. She stared straight at the camera, or maybe the wall behind it, and said softly, "One day she's going to come back for this house. You know that, right?" Marcy rolled her eyes. "Let her. She'll be too late." Darren. He raised his glass. "To early retirement and Lana never knowing." Harlan leaned back, arms crossed. "Do you want to release this?" I didn't speak right away. "I don't know," I finally said. Does it matter now? It could make things harder for them. Especially Marcy. She's up for sentencing. But Jenna. I trailed off. He nodded. This doesn't exist without her. I don't want revenge, I said. I just want it to be done. Sometimes done means showing people what really happened, he said. Even if it's ugly. In the end, I didn't release it publicly. But I sent a copy to the judge. Just a flash drive. No note, no commentary. I figured Jenna had already said enough. Later that week, I received a voicemail. It was Jenna. I know you probably hate me, she said, her voice trembling, and that's fair. But I couldn't walk away from what we did. Not without trying to undo a little of it. I never expected forgiveness. I just wanted the truth to live somewhere outside my own head. She paused, then added, If you ever need a locksmith again, I still know people. I almost laughed. It was the most human I'd ever heard her sound. That weekend, I went to a community lecture on housing fraud. Harlan was one of the panelists. I sat in the back hoodie up sipping weak coffee. A woman 2 rows ahead of me raised her hand. My brother forged my signature and took our parents' cabin, she said, voice shaking. No lawyer wants the case. What do I do? The room was quiet. And before Harlan could answer, I did. You find someone who believes you. And if no one does, you keep every receipt anyway. They'll catch up. She turned around. We locked eyes. She nodded. I left before the talk ended. The air outside was crisp. The sun dipped low against rooftops, golden and warm. As I walked home, I realized something strange. I hadn't thought about Darren or Marcy all day. They no longer lived in the corners of my mind. They weren't shadows anymore. They were just gone. And what remained was mine. Truly mine. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I was curled up in my reading chair with a mug of chamomile, the fireplace humming softly, and a book I wasn't really reading open in my lap. After everything, I had grown to love the silence of this house, the house that once held betrayal, but now held only peace. But peace can be interrupted. I opened the door expecting a delivery, or maybe Harlan dropping by with some new legal update. Instead, a woman in a long navy trench coat stood on my porch, holding a sleek leather portfolio and a hesitant smile. Lana Whitmore, she asked. Yes, she offered her hand. I'm Valerie Green. I work with the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. Mind if I come in? I paused. My instinct was caution. After everything with Darren and Marcy, I'd learned to treat every unannounced visitor as a possible threat. But Valerie had that calm, measured energy, the kind that comes with government training and years of seeing worse things than mine. Sure, I said. Come in. She took a seat on the couch and carefully placed the portfolio on her lap. We've been reviewing your case. She began alongside several others involving identity misuse, tied to predatory lending and collusion with internal bank employees. Your name came up more than once. I raised an eyebrow. I thought my case was already closed. It is on the criminal side, but we're doing a broader investigation into systemic failures. Your case may be one of the keystones. I wasn't sure how to feel about that proud. Exposed. She continued. We're launching a documentary project, a collaboration between the department and a nonprofit. The goal is public education, but also real impact. Real names. Real stories. We want you to be part of it. I let out a small, surprised laugh. You want me to… what? Talk about what happened. We'd give you editorial control, she said. You decide what goes in. You can remain anonymous if you want. But your story, it's powerful, Lana, and it could help change policy. The kind that prevents this from happening to the next woman. I didn't respond immediately. She didn't push. Instead, she reached into her folder and handed me a sheet of testimonial snippets from other victims. A retired man in Oregon, a single mother in Texas, a college student in debt for a house he didn't even know had his name on it. Different states, different banks, same predators. I read the quotes. One line stood out. I didn't know I mattered until someone else said, "This shouldn't have happened to you." That one hit hard. After Valerie left, I sat on the back porch and watched the wind nudge leaves into swirling spirals on the stone patio. The late afternoon sun painted the edges of the house in copper and gold. I remembered the day Darren moved in with Marcy, how they held champagne glasses on this very deck, how they laughed about my granola lifestyle and said I didn't know how to use property like a real adult. And now, the house was quiet. No lies echoed through its hallways. No mockery clung to the furniture, just the hum of truth finally spoken. That night, I called Valerie back. "I'll do it," I said. "But I don't want to be the victim. I want to be the warning." Her smile came through even across the phone line. "You'll be both and more." In the weeks that followed, a small crew came in to film the interview. They were discreet, kind, and surprisingly gentle with the details. We shot everything in the living room, the same place where I once found a forged signature on a fake utility bill. Now it would hold something different. My voice. I told them everything. About the betrayal, the fear, the lawyer who actually believed me, the locks, the silence, and finally, the choice to stay. The documentary was released online and at a public policy summit in D.C. It was called Sign Not Yours: The Hidden Faces of Home Fraud. I watched it once, then never again. But the responses came flooding in emails, letters, a few knocks on my door from people who lived nearby but had no idea what I had survived. And one morning I found a small box on my doorstep. Inside, a handwritten card. "I saw your film," I cried. Then I called a lawyer. "Thank you. You gave me permission to fight?" There was no name, just a return address from Nebraska. Sometimes I still get anxious when a new envelope arrives. Sometimes I still hesitate before logging into my bank account. But most days I feel something different. Not closure, not even justice, but presence. I am no longer invisible in my own life. And that's a start. It had been 3 months since the documentary aired. The leaves had shifted from amber to brittle brown. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet earth. The quiet that once felt hollow had turned into something warm, like an old coat rediscovered in the back of the closet. My mornings were no longer braced with anxiety. My nights weren't haunted by signatures that weren't mine. I had learned to breathe again. But peace, it seems, is never permanent. At least not for long. One Friday afternoon, as I sorted through the week's mail, I found a thin white envelope nestled between a utility bill and a local newsletter. The return address said Bennington and Hartwell, LLP, law firm. My chest tensed instinctively, an old reflex. But when I opened it, I didn't find a threat. I found an invitation. "Dear Ms. Lana Whitmore, we recently viewed your interview in the DFPI documentary, and were deeply moved by both your composure and your clarity. Our firm has spent the last decade working on systemic financial reform through legal strategy and corporate accountability. We are assembling a special task unit funded through a private grant focused on homeowner protection law, victim advocacy, and class action coordination. We would like to invite you to consult with us, not as a client, as a strategist. Please let us know if you are open to a conversation. Sincerely, Marissa Hartwell-esque, partner Bennington and Hartwell." I read the letter twice, then again, and again. They weren't offering to help me. They were offering to work with me, to sit at the table, to help others like me, but not from a place of pain, from a place of strategy, purpose, power. The next morning, I took the train into the city. The firm's office was perched in a glass tower that reflected the clouds and the skyline like a promise. Marissa Hartwell was younger than I expected. Early 40s, crisp suit, short curly hair pulled back, and an energy that managed to be both intense and kind. Her handshake was firm. Her voice was warm. "We don't usually bring in people without legal backgrounds," she said. "But your insight in the film, it wasn't just emotional. It was structural. You saw the gaps in the system and knew where the pain slipped through." "I lived it," I said quietly. "That's why we want you." She walked me through the project, a 5-person team, one major civil case already underway, and 3 states about to adopt new legislation based on the findings of the investigation. "We need someone who speaks both languages," she explained. "The legal and the lived. You do." It was surreal. To be sitting in that office talking about consumer protection strategy like it was a career, not a wound. I asked her, what would my role actually look like? "You'd review victim cases, help shape how we communicate with state investigators and nonprofits, and you'd co-develop a program to help teach financial self-defense, especially to women over 40, the most targeted group. I blinked. That sounds like a lot. She smiled. It is. But so are you. That night, I walked along the river, the city glowing behind me. I thought about how far I'd come, from being tricked into a loan I never signed, to changing the locks on people who once shared my blood, to helping rewrite the rules so no one else would have to, and still I hesitated. Could I go back into that world? Could I hold that pain every day without drowning? I called Harlan. He picked up on the second ring. Lana, he said warmly, what's on your mind? I told him everything. He paused, then said, here's what I know. Some people are called to carry their trauma. Others are called to transform it. I was quiet. You were never just a victim, he added. You were the storm that broke the lock. And now they're asking if you want to become the architect. The next week I said yes, not because I was healed, but because I wasn't done. 6 months later, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. The silence that once echoed with betrayal now hummed with something different. Purpose. I'd repainted the guest room a deep sage, planted herbs by the kitchen window, hung my grandmother's quilt in the upstairs hallway where the morning light kissed its stitches. Some days I still checked the door twice, still flinched at blocked numbers, but mostly I lived. The law firm work had become more than a job. It was a reclamation. Every case I read felt like another strand of the net that once held me now unraveling under our hands. I was no longer waiting for justice. I was part of delivering it. Then one Saturday morning, a knock came. Not the doorbell. A knock. I opened the door and saw her. Chelsea, my niece. She stood there, arms crossed, dark curls tucked into a low ponytail. 21 now. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been crying in the back seat as her parents drove away from my locked front gate. Aunt Lana, she said, her voice tight. Can I talk to you? I stepped aside. She walked in quiet. No drama, no tears, just a small envelope in her hand. I'm not here because they sent me, she said before I could ask. I haven't spoken to them in 2 months. I raised an eyebrow. They used my name too, she continued, for a credit card. Maxed it out on furniture they never gave me. I found out when I applied for a student loan and got denied. My stomach dropped. Chelsea looked me dead in the eye. I remember what you said, she whispered. That sometimes the only way out of a legacy is to burn it. I sat down. So what now? I reported them, she said. Feds are investigating, and I left. She placed the envelope on the table. Inside, a copy of her affidavit, her new address in Seattle, and a photo of her standing in front of a small apartment building holding keys. I thought maybe you'd like to see someone else get their locks back too. For the first time in a long time, I cried. Not out of sadness, but because the cycle had cracked. The legacy of quiet, of deception, of generational debt had been interrupted by a girl brave enough to say no, and a woman who once had to change the locks to start her life again. That night, I wrote Chelsea a letter. Dear Chelsea, you don't owe me anything. But if you ever need someone to sit on your side of the table, I'm there. Not as a victim, not as family, as someone who survived it too. The next morning, I walked to the kitchen window, sipping my coffee, watching the light shift across the garden. A key sat on the counter, the old key, from before I changed the locks. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, then dropped it into the recycling bin with a soft clink. Some things don't belong in drawers. Some stories don't need reopening. If this story stirred something in you, subscribe for more true life tales of betrayal, redemption, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your name. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with a bang. It arrives with a click, as the lock turns and the story begins again, this time with you holding the key.